I was standing at the edge of my private lake in Ridgefall County, Montana, when I realized everything I had built was gone. Hundreds of rainbow trout floated belly up across the surface, motionless, shining in the early light like coins tossed into a cursed wishing well. Just yesterday, this water was so clear you could see straight to the bottom. Now it smelled sharp and metallic, wrong in a way you feel in your chest before your brain catches up. 5 years of work vanished overnight, permits, breeding stock, equipment, and the only steady income I had left after the Army. That's when Marjorie Klein, the HOA head from Clearview Heights, stepped onto my dock like she owned the place. It was barely 7 in the morning. She had a coffee in one hand and a satisfied smile on her face. She didn't apologize. She didn't even pretend to be surprised. She told me the lake was an eyesore, the people fishing ruined her neighborhood's look, and that now the problem was finally handled. Then she admitted it, calm as could be. The HOA dumped chemicals into my lake after midnight. What Marjorie didn't know, what no one in her gated community bothered to check, was that the underground spring feeding my lake also supplied every home in Clearview Heights. They didn't just poison my fish, they poisoned their own drinking water. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? When people see pictures of Montana, they think it is all postcard peace, pine trees, clean water, and quiet skies. What they do not see is what it takes to build a life here when your body is not the same as it used to be. My name is Caleb Rourke. I was an Army engineer, the kind of guy who could turn a pile of broken parts into a bridge and keep a convoy moving. Then one roadside blast overseas took more than a piece of my leg. It took my rhythm. It took the easy confidence of knowing I could always muscle through anything. When I came home, I learned quickly that "thank you for your service" does not pay the mortgage. The disability checks helped, but not enough to feel like I was living. I felt like I was surviving. That changed when my grandfather passed and left me his land just outside Ridgefall County. 200 acres of rough grassland and timber edges, an old barn leaning like it was tired, and a spring-fed lake that had been there longer than anyone could remember. Clearwater Lake was not huge, but it was deep and cold, fed by underground springs that kept it clean even in the hottest part of summer. The first time I stood at the shore, I watched trout break the surface, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to calm. But calm does not last if you do not give it a job. I knew I could not go back to heavy construction work full-time. My mobility was limited. Some days my leg hurt so bad it felt like the past had claws in it. I needed something I could manage, something that respected my body and still made me feel useful. The lake gave me that idea. I started small, doing research in the evenings, learning about trout farming, water quality, and sustainable stocking. I learned what I could legally do and what I could not. I went to the county office more times than I can count. I filled out paperwork until my hand cramped. I sat through inspections that felt like interrogations. I built floating pens with my own hands, slow and careful, measuring twice because I could not afford to redo anything. Every time I got frustrated, I reminded myself of one truth. I was building something no one could take away from me. By the time it was running, it was not some shady operation like people assume. It was clean, legal, and sustainable. I had permits. I had routine inspections. I kept records on water temperature, oxygen levels, feed, growth rates, everything. I sold stocking and guided fishing access in a controlled way. Families came out on weekends. A couple of local vets came out sometimes too, just to sit by the water and breathe like the world was not demanding anything from them for a few hours. The lake became more than income. It became proof that I could still build a life. And that is exactly why the HOA hated it. Clearview Heights did not exist when my grandfather bought the property. It was carved out later, uphill from my land, where the views were wide and the lots were expensive. The development marketed itself like some exclusive retreat, mountain living with luxury comfort. The residents were mostly transplants, people who moved from big cities chasing a quiet dream. They wanted Montana scenery, the way people want wallpaper, beautiful, controlled, and silent. They loved the idea of living near nature. They just did not want nature to involve other people. The first time I saw the problem coming was when a woman in a spotless SUV stopped at the edge of my access road and stared down toward the lake like she was evaluating a stain. She did not wave. She did not smile. She just watched the families walking in with fishing poles and coolers like the sight offended her. A week later, I got my first letter. It was printed on thick paper, the kind that tries to look official without being official. Clearview Heights Homeowners Association, it read. It said I was violating community standards. It said my visitors were causing noise. It said parking near the lake was disruptive. It said my operation was commercial activity incompatible with the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I remember laughing when I read it because it was ridiculous. My property was outside their development. Their rules did not apply to me. I could have thrown it in the trash and moved on, but the letters did not stop. Then came the phone calls to the county. Then came the anonymous complaints that my lake was polluted, that I was dumping waste, that I was running an illegal business. Every time someone showed up to inspect, everything came back clean, every time. That should have been the end of it. Instead, that was when Marjorie Klein introduced herself. She showed up one morning wearing a blazer like she was heading into a board meeting, not walking onto a dock. She did not ask if she could step onto my property. She simply did it, clipboard in hand, her posture sharp and rehearsed. She told me she was the HOA head for Clearview Heights and that she was concerned. Concerned about cars parking near the lake. Concerned about outsiders walking too close to the back fences of her residence lots. Concerned about the sound of people laughing on weekends like it was a form of vandalism. She said fishing created commercial noise, like a kid reeling in a trout was the same thing as a factory. She wanted me to build fencing and privacy screens along the shoreline. She wanted me to limit access to certain hours. She wanted me to stop allowing guided fishing groups altogether. I kept my voice calm. I told her the truth. My land was not part of her HOA. Her rules did not apply. Everything I did was legal. If she had a real concern, she could take it to the county the same way everyone else did. Marjorie smiled in a way that made my stomach tighten, not friendly, not amused, more like someone watching a door close and already planning how to pry it open. "You don't understand how this works," she said, flipping her clipboard shut like she had decided the meeting was over. "People paid a lot of money for those views. Your little fishing circus is dragging the value down." I told her I was not running a circus. I was running a lawful operation on my family land, and I was not shutting it down because someone uphill decided they did not like seeing pickup trucks and fishing poles. That was when her smile disappeared completely. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her coffee, and she spoke low, like she was sharing advice. "If you won't shut it down willingly," she said, "we'll make sure it gets shut down another way." Marjorie did not waste any time proving that her threat was not just talk. Within days, the pressure started coming from every direction, fast and relentless, like someone trying to bury me under paper instead of dirt. The first wave was nuisance complaints, calls to the county about noise that did not exist, claims that visitors were trespassing on private land that was clearly marked and legally accessible, reports that trash was being dumped, even though I kept the shoreline cleaner than most public parks. Every complaint forced a response. Every response meant time, energy, and paperwork. That was the point. Marjorie was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to wear me down. Then the accusations got heavier. Environmental violations. Claims that my fish operation was contaminating the water. Allegations that I was overstocking, overfeeding, and damaging local wildlife. On paper, those accusations looked serious. In real life, they fell apart the moment anyone showed up and actually looked. My records were clean. My water tests were consistent. My permits were current. Still, the calls kept coming, always from the same source, always worded slightly differently, like someone thought changing the phrasing would eventually make one of them stick. The real blow came when Marjorie went after my permits. I got a letter from the county stating that my operation was under review due to ongoing concerns raised by the surrounding community. That phrase, surrounding community, was doing a lot of work because the only people complaining lived uphill in Clearview Heights. My stomach dropped when I read it. Permits are not just paperwork. They are your lifeline. Lose them, and everything you built becomes illegal overnight. That is when Deputy Landon Pierce showed up. Landon was a county inspector, but more than that, he was a fellow veteran. I noticed it right away. The way he moved, the way he listened more than he talked. When he saw the prosthetic brace under my jeans, he nodded once. Not pity, just recognition. He told me he had been assigned to conduct a full inspection and review of my operation, top to bottom. We spent the entire day together. I showed him everything. The pens, the feed logs, the oxygen monitors, the water temperature records, the inspection reports from previous years. He asked questions that told me he actually understood what he was looking at. Not gotcha questions, real ones. By the end of it, he shook his head slowly and said, "This is one of the cleanest setups I've seen." A week later, his report came back. Not only did it clear me completely, it documented something else. A pattern, repeated complaints from the same HOA source. Allegations that had already been disproven being resubmitted under new wording. Attempts to escalate without new evidence. In plain language, Landon called it what it was, harassment. For a brief moment, I thought that might be the end of it. I was wrong. Marjorie shifted tactics. If she could not choke me out with paperwork, she would try fear. One Saturday morning, 2 black SUVs pulled up near the access road leading to the lake. Out stepped men in tactical-style clothing, radios clipped to their vests, arms crossed like they were guarding a crime scene. They were not law enforcement. They did not have badges. They did not have authority. But they acted like they did, and that was enough to scare people who did not know better. Families showed up to fish and were told the area was under investigation. A guide I worked with was told he would be charged with trespassing if he did not leave. One man was threatened with having his license plate reported. It was intimidation, pure and simple, dressed up to look official. I confronted them and asked who hired them. One of the guards smirked and said they were contracted by Clearview Heights to maintain order. When I told them the road was not HOA property, they shrugged like facts were optional. That was the moment I realized Marjorie was not just trying to control her neighborhood. She was trying to erase me. Word spread fast. People started filming on their phones. Someone called the sheriff. I called Deputy Pierce. Within minutes, real authority arrived. Sheriff's deputies pulled in with lights on, stepped out, and immediately asked the private guards for identification and jurisdiction. The color drained from their faces. The deputies told them, clearly and loudly, that they had no legal authority to block access, no right to threaten civilians, and no permission to operate on my land. They were ordered to leave. The crowd watched as the SUVs backed out, slow and awkward, like a bad bluff being called. That should have been enough embarrassment for one day. Marjorie apparently disagreed. She showed up herself not long after, clipboard in hand, heels sinking into the dirt like she resented the ground for existing. She announced she was conducting a violation inspection on behalf of the HOA and started taking photos of my dock, my pens, my equipment, narrating violations that did not exist, like she was recording evidence for a courtroom that only lived in her head. I told her to stop. I told her she was trespassing. She ignored me. So I made one more call. When the deputies returned, this time with witnesses all around, they shut it down immediately. They told her she had no authority there. They told her she was trespassing. They told her to leave my property or face consequences. Cameras were out. People were watching. The illusion she had been carefully building shattered in real time. Marjorie's face went tight, not angry, controlled, calculating. As she walked past me, close enough that no one else could hear, she leaned in and spoke quietly, her voice flat and cold. "You're going to regret making this public." I thought the worst of it was over after Marjorie embarrassed herself in front of half the county. I believed that once the fake authority was exposed, once the deputies made it clear she had no power on my land, she would retreat back uphill and lick her wounds. That was me still thinking like a reasonable person. The warning came from someone I did not expect. Her name was Elaine Brooks, and until that point, I only knew her as a name printed at the bottom of HOA letters, listed as treasurer for Clearview Heights. I had never spoken to her. I did not even know what she looked like. Then one afternoon, as I was locking up the equipment shed, a sedan pulled in slowly and parked well away from the dock, like whoever was inside did not want to be seen. Elaine stepped out and walked toward me with her hands folded tight in front of her, glancing over her shoulder more than once. She did not smile. She did not introduce herself right away. She just asked if we could talk somewhere private. We stood near the tree line, out of sight of the road. Her voice shook when she finally spoke. "I shouldn't be here," she said. "But I can't pretend I don't know what's coming." She told me she handled the HOA's finances, every invoice, every approval, every purchase. And a few days earlier, Marjorie had personally signed off on an order that made Elaine's stomach drop. It was labeled as algae treatment, something HOAs use for decorative ponds. But the quantity was massive, not a few bags, not a maintenance amount, enough to treat a body of water far larger than any decorative pond Clearview Heights had. Elaine said she questioned it, asked why they needed that much, asked where it would be used. Marjorie told her it was preventative and ordered her to process it anyway. As Elaine spoke, something cold slid into place in my chest. I knew exactly what kind of chemical she was talking about. Copper-based compounds are common in water treatment. Used correctly, in controlled doses, they suppress algae growth. Used incorrectly, they do something else entirely. They kill fish fast. They strip oxygen from the water. They bind to sediment and linger. And, if they enter a connected water system, they do not just disappear, they move. I asked Elaine how much had been ordered. When she told me, I felt lightheaded. That was not algae treatment. That was poison. Elaine whispered that she was scared. Scared of Marjorie. Scared of what would happen if the residents found out. Scared that her name was attached to the paperwork. She had copies of the invoice, approval signatures, dates. She said she would give them to me if I promised not to reveal where they came from yet. I promised. After she left, I stood alone by the lake for a long time, watching the water ripple in the wind. Up until that moment, everything Marjorie had done fit into a pattern I understood. Harassment, intimidation, abusive process. Ugly, but familiar. This was different. This was not about noise complaints or property values. This was about someone willing to permanently destroy something just to get her way. I told myself she would not actually do it. That was my mistake. Still, I started preparing. Quietly. Carefully. I installed trail cameras around the shoreline, hidden in trees and angled to capture movement on the water. I ordered additional water testing kits, the kind that could detect heavy metals, not just surface quality. I backed up every permit, every inspection report, every email and letter I had ever received from the HOA. I kept a written log of dates, times, and interactions, even the ones that felt small, especially the ones that felt small. But even then, my mindset was defensive. I was thinking like a landowner protecting himself from harassment. I was thinking in terms of disputes and documentation. I was not thinking like someone about to become the target of a deliberate environmental crime. At night, I started sleeping lightly. Every sound carried farther than it should have. A splash in the water, a distant engine. Wind moving across the surface of the lake sounded different when you were listening for the wrong thing. I checked the cameras more than once before dawn, half expecting to see nothing and hoping that would be the case. The lake looked the same on the surface. Clear. Alive. Trout still rising in the early morning light. Visitors still laughing along the shore, unaware that something had shifted beneath all of it. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. That Marjorie was cruel but not reckless. That no one would risk serious consequences over something as petty as fishing access. But the paperwork Elaine showed me kept replaying in my head. The quantity. The signature. The way Marjorie had looked when she told me I would regret making things public. Standing there one evening, watching the sun sink behind the trees and the water turn dark and glassy, I felt a weight settle in my gut that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with certainty. Something irreversible was coming. And by the time it showed itself, it would already be too late to stop. It happened overnight, exactly the way I had feared, and somehow still worse than I imagined. The cameras caught it just after midnight. I did not see it until the next morning, but the timestamp burned itself into my memory later. A single kayak slid out onto the lake from the far shoreline, quiet and deliberate, the kind of movement that tells you whoever is paddling knows exactly where they are going. The person kept to the darker water, away from the dock lights, moving slow enough not to make ripples that would carry. They were dressed in dark clothing. Their face was hidden under a hood and a cap. No hesitation, no confusion. The camera picked up the moment the first container tipped. A thick stream poured into the water, heavier than anything natural. Then another, and another. The kayak barely rocked, like this had been practiced. The person worked methodically, stopping at multiple points around the lake, dumping until the containers were empty, then stacking them flat. When it was done, the kayak turned back toward shore and disappeared the same way it came. The lake went still again. By morning, the damage was undeniable. I stepped onto the dock just after sunrise and smelled it before I saw it. A sharp, metallic bite in the air that did not belong in clean mountain water. Then my eyes adjusted and my stomach dropped. Trout floated everywhere, big ones, small ones, breeders I had raised from fingerlings. Fish I recognized by their markings, by the way they moved when they were alive. They lay belly up across the surface, caught against the shoreline, drifting in slow circles like the lake itself was trying to make sense of what had happened. I remember sitting down hard on the edge of the dock because my leg would not hold me anymore. I remember thinking, very calmly, that this could not be real. That there had to be another explanation. A storm. A freak temperature change. Anything that did not involve someone choosing to do this. But there was no mistaking it. 5 years of work were gone in a single night. The fish were my inventory, my income, my proof that the whole thing had been worth it. Without them, I had nothing but water and debt. The cost of restocking alone was more than I could afford. The cleanup, the testing, the lost business, it all stacked up instantly, crushing and immediate. And underneath the shock was something worse than panic. Grief. I had poured myself into that lake because it gave me purpose when I thought I had lost it for good. Watching it poisoned felt personal in a way paperwork and threats never did. It felt like someone reached back through everything I had rebuilt and tried to erase it. The call started almost immediately. Neighbors. A fishing guide who had planned to bring his kids out that day. People asking what happened, their voices tight with concern. I told them to stay away. To keep their kids out of the water. To wait. Then, I made the call I had been hoping I would never need to make. By late morning, Ranger Sofia Delgado arrived. She was a state wildlife officer, calm and precise, the kind of person who speaks softly because she does not need to raise her voice to be taken seriously. She took one look at the lake and did not waste time on guesses. She collected water samples, sediment samples, fish tissue. She photographed everything. She asked careful questions about recent conflicts, recent purchases, recent threats. When I showed her the footage, she watched it twice without blinking. "This isn't natural," she said. "This is chemical." The words landed heavy even though I already knew them. Sophia explained the process as she worked, narrating each step so the chain of evidence would be clean and unbroken. Every sample was logged. Every container I pulled from the shoreline was bagged and tagged. She told me plainly that this was not just a wildlife violation. This was contamination. Depending on where the water moved, it could involve multiple agencies. That was when I showed her the paperwork, Elaine's copies, the invoice, the quantity, the approval signature. The purchase had been made using the Clearview Heights HOA account. The vendor was legitimate. The delivery was documented. And at the bottom of the page, in ink, was Marjorie's name, her signature, her authorization. Sophia's expression changed when she saw it. Not shock, recognition. "This just crossed a line," she said. Actually, it crossed several. By that afternoon, word spread fast. The lake was taped off. Warning signs went up. County officials arrived, then state officials. The story was no longer about a fight between a landowner and an HOA. It was about a deliberate act that put wildlife, property, and potentially people at risk. I replayed the footage that night, alone, sitting at my kitchen table with the lights off, watching the kayak move across the water again and again, watching the poison pour out, watching the calm precision of someone who believed they would never be held accountable. That was when the final piece clicked into place. This was not contained to my lake. The spring that fed it did not stop at my shoreline. It ran underground, through rock and soil, moving the way water always does, slow but relentless. Whatever had been dumped into my lake was already traveling. The fish were just the first to show it. And somewhere uphill, beyond the trees, beyond the fences, people were still turning on their taps, unaware that the water flowing into their homes was no longer clean. The science entered my life quietly, the way the truth often does, without drama or raised voices. Dr. Hannah Whitlock drove out the morning after the state officers finished their first round of sampling. She did not arrive with flashing lights or urgency in her movements. She arrived with maps, binders, and the kind of calm that comes from someone who understands exactly how bad things can get when people ignore what is beneath their feet. She walked the shoreline slowly, kneeling now and then to touch the water, to study the sediment. When she spoke, it was not speculation. It was explanation. The lake, she told me, was not an isolated body of water. It never had been. It sat on top of a limestone network that acted like a hidden highway for groundwater. The spring feeding my lake traveled through that rock, branching and reconnecting, eventually feeding the private wells that supplied Clearview Heights. On paper, it looked neat and distant. In reality, it meant that whatever entered my lake did not stay there. Water moves, always. Dr. Whitlock laid out the timeline with careful precision. The copper compounds would not rush through the system like a flood. They would move slowly, binding to rock, leaching forward inch by inch, weeks, not days. Quiet, not dramatic. By the time residents noticed anything off, a taste, a smell, a test result, the contamination would already be there. Invisible. Hearing it explained that way changed everything. Up until then, the damage felt personal. My fish, my lake, my livelihood, my livelihood. This reframed it into something far larger. Families uphill were still drinking that water. Kids brushing their teeth, elderly residents filling kettles in the morning. None of them knew that the source had been poisoned because one person decided fishing access offended her view. Dr. Whitlock looked at me and asked a question that felt heavier than any accusation. "What do you want to do with this information?" I had two choices, and neither of them was easy. I could go public immediately. Call every reporter, post everything online. Force panic before the water had even finished moving. Or I could slow down, build a case so solid that no one could deny it, and make sure the response was controlled, factual, and impossible to spin. I chose the second option, even though it meant carrying the weight longer. That was when ECO Klaus Morenik entered the picture. Lucas was a local investigative reporter, the kind who did not chase viral headlines but understood how power actually moved in small communities. He did not show up with a camera crew. He showed up with questions. He listened more than he spoke. He cross-checked everything. When I introduced him to Dr. Whitlock, his interest sharpened immediately. He started digging into Clearview Heights, HOA finances, meeting minutes, past disputes, patterns of control. And the more he uncovered, the more residents started noticing things they had brushed off before. Unusual spending approvals, decisions made without votes, complaints dismissed, neighbors silenced. Questions began circulating quietly at first, then louder. Inside the HOA, pressure built fast. Elaine Brooks came back, this time with a folder thick enough to make her hand shake. She had pulled records going back years. Expense reports, emergency approvals, chemical purchases, legal consultations, all of it tied back to the same signature, the same name. Elaine was terrified, but she was also done protecting someone who had put her community at risk. Homeowners started demanding meetings. They wanted explanations for the blocked roads, for the security guards, for the money. They wanted to know why state officers had been seen near the lake and why warning signs suddenly appeared along the water. The board tried to calm them, tried to stall, tried to reassure. Marjorie went on the offensive. She issued a public statement claiming the lake incident was an unfortunate natural event, a sudden environmental shift, a coincidence. She blamed weather patterns. She blamed runoff from unregulated land use. She insisted the HOA had no involvement and accused me of exaggeration and hysteria. On camera, she looked composed, professional, confident. Off camera, she unraveled. Lucas caught glimpses of it during interviews. The way her hands shook when questions turned technical. The way she snapped at board members. The frantic emails she sent to consultants, asking for language that could explain away copper levels. The rushed calls to lawyers asking how much exposure she faced. She started making mistakes. She contradicted herself. She approved emergency spending without documentation. She pushed for silence when people wanted transparency. Every attempt to control the narrative only drew more attention to what she was trying to hide. And I watched it all from a distance, the weight of the underground truth pressing on me every time I turned on the tap in my own house and refused to drink the water. The contamination had not reached the wells yet. Not fully. Dr. Whitlock confirmed it again and again. But it was moving, patient, relentless. Marjorie stood at podiums and denied everything with a practiced smile, telling anyone who would listen that the HOA was the victim of an overblown accusation. At night, according to Elaine, she paced. She demanded reassurance. She asked the same questions over and over. How long until it shows? Can they prove it came from us? What happens if the residents find out first? The ground beneath Clearview Heights was carrying the answer forward, one quiet inch at a time, and no amount of denial was going to stop it. By the time the annual HOA meeting finally arrived, the tension in Ridgefall County was so thick it felt like weather. The parking lot outside the Clearview Heights Community Hall overflowed onto the road. News vans lined the curb. Cameras were already rolling before anyone stepped inside. County officials stood along the back wall, arms folded, faces unreadable. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble. Everyone knew something was about to break. I walked in carrying a plain plastic bin. No signs, no speeches prepared. Just proof. Marjorie was already at the front of the room, seated behind a long folding table with the rest of the board. She looked composed, dressed like this was any other meeting, chin high, hands folded. If you did not know what she had done, you might have believed her calm meant innocence. But I had seen the emails. I had seen the panic. Calm was the last tool she had left. When my turn came to speak, the room went quiet in a way that felt unnatural, like even the air was holding its breath. I started with the basics. I showed the water test results. I laid out the maps Dr. Whitlock had prepared, the underground flow traced clearly from my lake to the wells beneath Clearview Heights. I played the video footage. The kayak, the containers, the dumping, no commentary. No emotion, just images and timestamps. Murmurs rolled through the room. Someone swore under their breath. A woman near the front covered her mouth with both hands. Marjorie stood up before I could continue. "This is misleading," she said sharply. "There has been no confirmed link between that incident and our water supply. This is speculation designed to create fear." I nodded once and reached into the bin. That was when I brought out the tanks. 2 clear containers, set side by side on the table. In the first, clean spring water drawn from an uncontaminated source, a few healthy trout swimming calmly. In the second, water mixed to match the copper levels projected to reach Clearview Heights wells once the contamination completed its path. The room leaned forward as one. I said nothing as I placed identical fish into both tanks. In the clean water, they swam normally, silver flashes under the lights. In the other, it took less than a minute. The fish began to thrash, gasping, bodies jerking erratically. Then they rolled, one by one, and floated still. Someone screamed. The room erupted. People stood, shouting questions, accusations, disbelief crashing into each other. Marjorie tried to speak over it, her voice shrill now, cracking as she insisted this was theatrical nonsense, that the demonstration proved nothing. That was when Richard Klein stood up. I had barely noticed him before then, seated a few chairs back, shoulders hunched, eyes darting like he wanted to disappear. Now he looked gray, hollowed out by weeks of pressure. His hands shook as he grabbed the back of a chair to steady himself. "Stop," he said. Not loud, but enough. The room quieted just enough. He swallowed hard and looked at Marjorie, not with anger, but with something worse, resignation. "She told me it would fix the problem," he said. "She said it would scare him off. She said it wouldn't go anywhere else." Marjorie spun toward him, eyes wide. "Richard, sit down." He did not. "She ordered it," he continued, voice breaking. "The chemicals. The dumping. She said fishing made us look cheap. She said property values mattered more." The silence that followed felt violent. No one moved. No one spoke. Cameras kept rolling, capturing the moment Marjorie's face drained of color as the story she had built collapsed under its own weight. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried to speak again, but the words would not come. 2 people stepped forward from the back of the room. EPA representatives, calm, professional, unimpressed. They spoke briefly with county officials, then approached the table. One of them asked Marjorie to step aside. Not arrested, not handcuffed, just removed, finished. As she was escorted out, she did not look at the crowd. She did not look at her husband. She stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, like denial could still protect her if she refused to acknowledge what had happened. The doors closed behind her. No one cheered. No one clapped. The room sat in stunned silence, the kind that presses against your ears until it almost hurts. People stared at the tanks, at the floating fish, at the evidence they could no longer argue with. For the first time since this began, there was nothing left to say. The days after the meeting felt unreal, like the world had tilted slightly and was still settling back into place. There was no dramatic music, no instant relief. Just consequences arriving one by one, heavy and unavoidable. The first priority was water. Within days, emergency systems were brought in for Clearview Heights. Tankers rolled through the gates morning and night. Temporary filtration units were installed. Residents were told not to drink from their taps, not to cook with the water, not even to brush their teeth without bottled supplies. The reality hit fast. This was no longer abstract science or theoretical risk. It was daily life disrupted, and everyone knew why. State and federal agencies descended on the area with quiet efficiency. Fines followed. Not symbolic ones, the kind that force organizations to open their books and reckon with every decision that led them there. Clearview Heights was hit with penalties that dwarfed anything the HOA had ever collected in dues. Environmental violations, civil liability, fraud tied directly to misuse of funds and false statements. Marjorie's name was attached to all of it over and over again. She was formally charged within weeks. Environmental contamination, abuse of authority, financial misconduct. Watching it unfold did not bring the satisfaction I thought it might. There was no victory lap, just a grim understanding that someone had chosen this path and now had to walk it all the way to the end. Inside the community, things unraveled quickly. The board tried to hold together at first, but trust was gone. Residents demanded resignations. Emergency meetings turned into shouting matches. Eventually, the structure that had allowed Marjorie to operate without oversight collapsed under its own weight. The HOA leadership was dissolved entirely, replaced temporarily by a court-appointed administrator to stabilize finances and handle compliance. Elaine Brooks stepped forward in a way that surprised no one who had watched her closely. She worked with regulators, turned over every record she had, and helped design a new governance framework that stripped away unilateral authority. Transparency became mandatory. Spending required multiple approvals. Oversight was no longer optional. Elaine never asked for praise. She just did the work, quietly undoing damage she never wanted to be part of in the first place. Something else happened too, something I did not expect. People apologized. Not in private messages or awkward side conversations, but publicly. At town meetings, in letters. Even in front of cameras, residents who had believed the narrative, who had trusted the HOA without question, stood up and admitted they had been wrong. They talked about complacency, about letting someone else speak for them because it was easier than paying attention, about how close they had come to drinking poisoned water because they assumed power meant competence. Those apologies mattered more than fines ever could. As for me, recovery did not come quickly. The lake was closed for months. Testing continued week after week. Dead fish were removed. Sediment was treated. Natural flushing was monitored carefully under guidance from environmental specialists. Some days it felt like watching a wound heal in slow motion, knowing it would scar but hoping it would still function. Grants came through eventually. Environmental restoration funds. Veteran assistance programs. Support. I did not know existed until people like Dr. Whitlock and Ranger Delgado pointed me toward them. It did not erase the loss, but it made rebuilding possible. The pens were cleaned and repaired. The shoreline was stabilized. When the first new trout were introduced, I stood on the dock and watched them disappear into deeper water, unsure if I was relieved or afraid to hope again. But the lake responded. Slowly, patiently, the way nature always does when given a chance, water clarity returned. Insects came back. Birds followed. Months later, I saw the first wild trout break the surface near the reeds, a small silver arc that felt like permission to breathe again. Justice, I learned, is not always loud. It does not always end with cheers or dramatic final lines. Sometimes it looks like accountability written into policy, like systems rebuilt so they cannot be abused again, like a community forced to confront what happens when power goes unchecked. Marjorie lost everything she had tried to protect. Not just her position, but her credibility, her control, her carefully constructed image. Clearview Heights lost its illusion of superiority and gained something far more valuable in its place: awareness. And me? I got my lake back, not the same as before. Stronger in some ways, scarred in others, but alive. And for the first time since all of this began, that felt like enough. Months have passed since the night my lake was poisoned, and with a little distance, I can finally see what this was really about. It was never just about fish. It was about control. About someone who believed rules were tools meant for other people, never for themselves. About power being used without understanding, without humility, and without regard for consequences. Poison doesn't just kill what it touches right away. It spreads quietly. It seeps into places you assume are safe. That's true in water, and it's true in communities. When authority goes unchecked, when people stop asking questions because someone sounds confident enough, damage follows. Sometimes you see it immediately. Sometimes it takes weeks. Sometimes it takes years. But nature keeps receipts. Water remembers what you put into it. The ground carries truth forward, whether you want it to or not. And paper trails? They do not care how important you think you are. Signatures last. Records surface. Reality catches up. These days, when I stand on the dock in the early morning, the lake feels different. Not worse, just honest. Trout break the surface again, quick flashes of silver in the sunlight. Kids come out with fishing poles that are almost too big for them, laughing when they miss a bite, cheering when they do not. The quiet is back, not the forced silence someone tried to impose, but the real kind, the kind that comes from balance being restored. I rebuilt. The community learned. And one person who thought she could bend everything to her will discovered that some systems cannot be bullied. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from?